Good morning and welcome to today's Moss Adams webcast, Streamline Annual Grant Audits with AI. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Moss Adams webcasts are designed to help elevate your business performance. Transform your future for the better with advisory solutions tailored to your vision and supported by our collective technical resources. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And with that, I will turn it over to Tim to get us started.
Thank you so much. So my name is Tim Oakes. I'm a partner here at Moss Adams. I've been working in the employee equity area for over 25 years and developing a number of systems to help businesses work better with their employee equity plans. And I'll let my colleague introduce himself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Austin Ulfers. I've been with Moss Adams for the past 3.5 years, working specifically in equity and bringing AI into that world. So excited to teach you all a little bit more about that a little on.
Before we go any further, I just wanted to do one clarification. We realized that our title of our presentation might have been confusing. What we're talking about today is employee equity grants, where companies provide their employees with grants as part of their compensation package. I'm afraid when we were looking at the registrants, it looked like some people might be thinking that this is like a state or federal grant and for funding businesses or other things. We do have a group here at Moss Adams that helps people with that. And so if you have questions, please reach out and we will be sure to get you into the right group to help you with some of that. But today we're going to be concentrating on the employee equity plans that companies use. Moving on. So, Moss Adams has been around for over 100 years. We have a lot of professionals in a bunch of different industries and locations and a very broad reach and also deep understanding of businesses. For today's agenda, we are first going to, just cover the landscape, talk about what the annual grant process looks like, just so that we set some context. And then we're going to talk about the common errors and the bad data that people find, and we'll drill into about outliers and compliance, and finally talk a little bit about the approval process. And then that portion will go pretty quickly, and then we're going to dive into a machine learning portion where we're going to talk about how machine learning can help with this. So getting right into this, so today's annual grant process, the way it usually happens for most companies. So the stock grants are proposed for employees. This usually happens through some performance management process, a tool or something. And they propose the stock grants either by a specific rules. Oh, if you're at this level and you got this rating, you get this amount, or manager discretion, or maybe a combination of both. After that process, and they have that you have that whole set of reviews and audits there, then the list of grants are complete and it's handed off to the stock team to actually get processed. So the stock team looks at the full list of grants, tries to identify any issues, tracks down any questions, and then they get the final list for approval because they have to be approved by someone within the company. So then the stock grants get approved. The approval list is sent to an authorized approvers for approval, and then that goes back to the stock team, who actually ends up then granting the stock to the employees. So that's our general process. We're going to pause for a poll real quick. So which part of the annual grant process is the most painful for you? Is it A, collecting the grant data, B, auditing the grant data, C, preparing and getting approvals, D, loading the approved grants to the system, or other, unsure, not applicable? So go ahead and submit your answer. And once we get up to a certain level, we'll move on. Great, thank you for starting the answers. Beautiful. We're at 40% of the people have answered so far. So we'll just give it a little bit longer and make sure we can get some good results here. They're still trickling in. Austin, did you have a bet on which one you think is going to be the top one here?
If I were to guess, I'd say maybe the auditing of the grant data. I think that's my prediction.
I think you might be right. That's always the challenge. There's fun about getting the approvals, and of course a lot of fun about doing the last part. But we'll see what everyone says. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Just a couple more people came in with their answers. Okay, we're going to go on. Thank you for participating. And so, unsure, not applicable. Yeah, that makes sense. Collecting the grant data. Wow. 21% auditing. Yeah, that is a challenge, is the auditing, and that's why we're here talking today. So let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about common errors. So when you first get the grant file, you usually have a list of things that you're looking for, and it's the common errors and bad data. And so this usually grows as a list over time. So when you're looking at the employee data, you might be looking at the hire date or the rehire date. Were they eligible to actually participate? To the termination date or a termination. And so maybe they terminated after they got the award and they shouldn't have gotten the award. The job level, is it appropriate, or is it filled in even? Are the countries correctly assigned? And then some companies also look at the account requirements. So are you able to open the brokerage account to actually load the data later on? And then on the grant side, of course, sometimes the data comes across clean, but it's up to the stock team to really make sure that it's going to be the right thing. And so you're looking at the grant date. Sometimes you're making sure the vesting schedule is appropriate for the employee or for the location. The type of stock. Some companies give different types of stocks in different country because of the tax implications. And then you could be looking for a duplicate or a missing grant. I think the duplicate grant's a little easier to find. Missing grant sometimes is a challenge. But moving right along, so those ones are pretty easy. You usually have the your list, and you're checking off the data, and you're saying, okay, this is good. But then what we find is, the teams that have been around for quite a while will jump in and do some other hand audits. Usually they throw all their stuff into Excel and they look at the data. And sometimes what they're looking for is just weird situations. I know people who actually, hey, I'm going to grab all the grants that are going to a particular country, and I'm just going to filter down to that, and I'm going to sort it by the size of the grant, and I'm just going to make sure that it all looks good. Or I'm going to look at all the grants for a particular job level, or I'm going to look at the hire date. And so you're using your great auditing tool, Excel, and the filters and maybe the pivot tables and sorting, and you're looking around and trying to pick out weird things. And sometimes it generates questions back to the management or to HR. Sometimes you can tell obviously that there's a problem and maybe you can fix it. And then, of course, the other portion that the stock team is looking at is compliance with the plan rules. Just because the performance management tool said this person got a stock grant doesn't necessarily mean that it's in compliance with what the plan rule says. So that you could have an ineligible employee. Maybe they are, don't work enough hours, or maybe they didn't get hired at the right time. Perhaps it's an incorrect award amount for their level or for their location. Perhaps it's an incorrect vesting schedule. So this is the next, it takes a little bit more work and takes a little more analysis in order to get through this portion of it. I think the first one, you have a list. This one, you have a list, but this one's a little more fuzzy as you go through this. So we're going to another poll. So when you are looking at the data and looking at your grant, what data problems cause you the most headaches? The employee data issues, a bad hire date or something, the grant data issues, the performance management team system set the wrong grant date or wrong grant amount or wrong grant type, or just identifying outliers. Or finally, D, finding plan compliance issues. Now, Austin, to be honest, I'm not sure where this one's going to go. It'll be interesting to see. I think that each company has a kind of different experience here. Sometimes it depends on the landscape of where they're at. If they're U.S. only, it can be a lot easier for them. But if they are global, then they have a lot more things to worry about. And then if they have a very complex plan, it can cause some headaches for them.
And then also different companies have different data systems that they're using as well. So, some things may be easier in one system and harder in another.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of the systems are better coordinated where the performance management system might know some of the rules already and set things up right. Okay. We have about 55% have answered and a couple more trickled in. So I'm just going to wait. Okay, we're going to close it off in just a couple seconds. Let's see the results. 40% employee data issues. Yeah, I guess that's not surprising. And then grant data issues, identifying outliers, and then finding plan compliance issues. I think finding plan compliance issues that can be a challenge. So we're going to move on. And we're talking about the approval process now. So you've done all your work, you've done all that cleanup, you've answered all the questions, and now you're ready to submit it for approval. And so what happens in approval process is, the stock team creates some kind of exhibits. And sometimes this includes a summary as well as detail. It really depends on what your approvers want to see. Then you actually, send it off for approval and collect the signatures from them once they approve it. Sometimes, the approvers come back with questions and say, well, is this one really right? It looks weird, or other things. And then there's a post-approval audit. So especially for an annual grant, this process can take an extended amount of time. And sometimes some of the grants actually have to go to the comp committee, which means you have to schedule the comp committee. And so a sizable amount of time could pass between when you actually give the grants over to the approvers and when you get the approval back. It could be weeks, it could be several weeks. And so when it comes back, now you might need to check for any changes that occurred during the approval process. So maybe an employee terminated during that. And so that's something that the groups do. And then finally, now you have it all nice and clean, and you're going to actually load it to the system so that it can be issued to the employees. So that's the whole approval process. Now, we've been talking about annual grants. I'm going to touch on just a little bit for just a moment the monthly or quarterly grants. And so depending on your company, as people come in, hire on, they might be eligible for an on-hire grant. And we've seen companies do this, collect it at a monthly basis or collect it all up together and issue it on a quarter. Sometimes these are pretty small, and so it doesn't take much effort to do it. But a lot of times companies have a process that looks just like this about, okay, we have collected the list of these on hire. We go through and test the data. We make sure everything's right, and then we get it in front of the approver and get a signature, and then we load it. But for some companies, especially if you're doing it quarterly, it can be a sizable number of grants, and it can take you quite a bit of time to get all the way through it. Very good. So I'm going to move on. We're going to move on. And Austin, you're going to take over at this point.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so we've taken a look so far at the, as Tim said, the approval process and the annual grant process to get everything approved. And so now kind of we've maybe hinted at some of the, bad data and the outliers and those types of problems that you may be experiencing. And so today I'm going to really be honing in on how machine learning can kind of help reduce some of those data errors and kind of help you, make it so you don't have to visually look into Excel to really go and identify those errors for you. So moving on here. So how does this work? So machine learning can be utilized to find outliers in data sets. So kind of similar to how you may be looking at Excel, filtering and sorting by different attributes in the data. The machine learning can do this, but essentially it can do it for all attributes across all correlations. So it's basically kind of doing what you're doing, but doing it into a maximum capacity. So it's basically, it's looking at correlations between things that you might not expect, or it might look at things that you might not, initially have a lot of sense, but it might disassociate those things, right? And so it might hone in onto those problems that you already are familiar with, or it might hone in on some other things. But essentially what it's doing in the background is just essentially what you do, filter and sort, but just doing it at a larger scale. Now, these data errors for the machine learning actually stick out like a sore thumb. So kind of like, as you go through and review in the Excel file, you have to kind of map in your head, like, oh, does this grant make sense for this employee at their job level, for their all certain criteria? Does it make sense? Whereas the AI can kind of, after it has looked at everything, it kind of just says, oh, I know this one right here is an error, and this is exactly why. And so once the machine learning has gone through and identified what it believes to be an outlier or an error, then the administrators can go back and review and correct those errors. So this is really all about just trying to surface kind of maybe the top 1% of records that might have an error, so that the team can go review and actually confirm that. So for an example, if you have 10,000 grants that you're reviewing for a given annual cycle, then instead of having to go through and review all 10,000, the AI will go through and say, okay, here's the top 1%, 0.5% of these errors or things that might look like an outlier. And then you can go through and actually just review those, kind of allowing you to have a little more of a narrow focus. So now, what is it not? So this machine learning solution is not a chat application. I know when a lot of people think of AI nowadays, they think, ChatGPT, they think of a lot of things that have to do with a chat-based interface. This is not that. So this is really just all about looking at the data itself. And then it's not a full-on replacement of an existing process. We really think that this is better integrated into the existing process, where it's helping you in that data correction and data identification stage, whereas it's not trying to basically just take your entire job and do everything like that. It's just helping you to kind of go through that approval and those processes a little bit quicker. So, and it's also not 100% accurate. False positives will arise. This is something that's kind of inherent. You've maybe heard of the hallucination problem when it comes to chat applications. False positives will exist anytime AI is involved. So it's really just about managing those expectations and then being able to identify and kind of course correct when those do occur. Now, so as we kind of, I think this was we've heard this from several different clients that we've talked to, but also that kind of maybe was reflected in some of the polling that we did a little bit earlier. What we've seen from people that we've talked to is that a lot of the errors that maybe the stock team sees, or they come from an upstream data source. So it's data that they don't normally own, and so it's hard to say if for certain if something has a problem or not. It's easy for when you own the data to say, okay, I know that in this scenario it typically works really well, or in this scenario it doesn't work very well. You kind of know those inherent rules about your data when you own it. But when it comes from another team or it comes from another department, it's harder to know for certain that those errors are correct, that data is correct, because you don't really know those inherent rules that you might have for the data that you own internally. So essentially, that's what the machine learning solution is all trying to do, is we're trying to help you find these upstream data errors so that you don't have to, have those inherent rules in your mind when you're going through this. It's a lot of times, being able to identify something that you don't know where, if you don't know where to start, then it's going to be a hard time to figure out what's wrong. So this is really all about being able to help with these types of errors. Now I'm going to just look at a brief look at the data. Obviously, I think a lot of people on this call are familiar with what some of this data already looks like. But if you're not, as Tim said earlier, you've got some of the employee data, and you've also got some of the grant data. This is, again, just kind of a very simplified version of what some of this might look like. But you've got some of the attributes in here. And in here, you just would go through in Excel, and potentially when you go to review an audit, go through and say, okay, let's slice this and dice this in order to kind of see what might be an error or doesn't follow plan policy or anything like that. As an example, one thing you might be looking at is the value per share. So that's one thing you want to make sure lines up, and you just want to kind of do the math around this area. There's maybe another area where you want to look at the hire dates. If someone has either been hired recently or as a new hire, then they might get a different type of grant than someone who's been with the company a little bit longer. There's you might be looking at row specific data where you want to find the rows that have the highest value and then audit those, because obviously when it comes to like executives that may be getting compensated higher, making sure those types of awards are correct is also very crucial, because not only are those more costly to correct and can cause issues for just in a volume sense, but it also can kind of have a damaging reputation as well for the company for that executive in the case that they don't have a smooth process for them. So that might be another case that you might be looking to review. Now, kind of what the AI is doing with this data is we essentially take this data set and of what you might be looking at for a given annual grant, and then you kind of run it through the AI, and then what the AI spits out is essentially a list of suspected errors and the explanations. So what it'll say is, it'll try and look through all this data, and it'll do those filtering and sort operations that we were talking about earlier that you would normally do in Excel. It's just doing those kind of on a massive scale, and then it's going to be able to spit back out to you some data that will help you kind of review what you think is necessary. So as an example output, one of the things might be that, for the output that the AI gives you specifically, it'll have a couple of columns, and we're kind of abbreviating here, and there's more stuff that we can add in if we want to, but the two main things that we provide back are a column that says, is there an error likely? This is essentially the AI's indicator to say, like, do we think that there's an error or an outlier in this column or in this piece of data? And so that's kind of one thing that you could then go on and filter through in Excel and say, okay, let's look at all the things that the AI identifies as potential errors, and let's review just that small subset, that 0.5%, 1% of all the data, whatever that might be. And then it's also going to give you an explanation. So then it's going to go through and say, oh, the AI suspects that it's the grant date, for this example, that was causing the error. And if we go through and actually look at the specific data again, in this specific instance, we wanted to have everyone in the USA have the same grant date for this annual grant. Obviously, this one for Marcus here has a grant date of February 20th. And so, whereas it should be March 20th, today's date. So in this instance, that's something that you maybe have already a rule for in your checklist or something that to kind of go through and check your grant date. But just kind of the idea here is just that there's sometimes you have to correlate several different things together in order to get to the potential error that comes out of it.
And Austin, I know that this was a very simplistic example, but I loved, in the other machine learning that you and I worked on, I loved how the output actually kind of stack ranks the possible columns of error. And so it says, 90% chance that the grant data is a problem, but there's also a little bit of chance that the shares are a problem or something else, and so I love that. So it helps you do the analysis without actually having to look at the number and go, oh, that's why it's coming up, why it's popping.
Exactly. And another point you touched on as well is one of the other things we get is the likelihood of an error as well. So it's not just a yes or no, kind of a binary output. It's, we give you the, percent likelihood. So it might be the AI might be 99% certain that there's an error in this specific piece of data. Whereas for another thing, it might still say it's error likely, but it might be closer to 50 or 60%. So kind of you can then kind of, if you're going through and reviewing everything afterwards, you can go through and say, okay, let's sort this top down. Let's look at the things that are most likely to contain error and then kind of review from there. Cool. So now where does this kind of reside in the process? We've talked a little bit about like what is actually happening and what the output is back to you, but where does this actually get integrated? So kind of what we've established is that it's essentially one of the processes when the stock grants get audited. That might be self-explanatory by now, but maybe not. So kind of making sure that the data is all, correct for when the stock team goes and reviews the list of grants is what's really important to make sure that gets right before it gets sent off to approval. And so kind of right here in this stage here is where, it can just be another step in your process where, okay, we've got all the data from our upstream data systems, we've got our HR data, we've got our grant data, we've got it all into one data set, and now let's send it over, or let's do this AI analysis in order to determine if there's any types of errors in the data that we're working with. So that's kind of where we suspect the best integration for this will be, is just kind of in that audit process. Now, speaking a little bit on the AI's benefits, obviously, I think the biggest one is that it reduces the amount of errors that come through the whole process. Now, obviously, errors can require corrective action, potentially even after the fact that they've been granted. In some instances, even after the shares have been sold. Obviously, if it makes it that far down the process, and some of those types of errors can cause financial impact. But more than just financial impact, you've got a reputational impact. You've got kind of just a various amount of things, and maybe in a wild scenario as well, you might have to do a W2C correction, right? If it gets all the way down that far. But hopefully the whole process here is that the sooner that we can identify these errors, the cheaper they are to fix, and then the less problems they cause down the line. So that's kind of the main benefit that you get here. You also get kind of the benefit of a reduced approval, the reduced amount of cycles that are required. The more errors you can find at the first pass, the less you need in review in the further passes. And then from a operational perspective, kind of implementing this type of error detection and error outliers is something that is very low cost and a relatively minimal level of effort to incorporate. So it's kind of a win-win where it allows your team to kind of focus on some of the more important things when it comes to the annual grant process, and not just identifying and making sure that your data actually looks as it is. So that's kind of the one benefit there. And then again, easily implemented, and then scalable process as the business grows. That's kind of one of the big things as well. Is
and Austin, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say,
ahead,
so as companies get bigger, there's more and more data that might have to get reviewed on a given, annual grant. And so instead of maybe right now, maybe your company is only doing 1,000 grants for the annual cycle. And then, but, as that business grows, that might be something at 10,000, 100,000, who knows how big that could get. And so obviously, allowing your team not to have a manual intervention step in there kind of reduces that, that load that's on your team, and allows that kind of to be offloaded, and the AI will be able to run as fast as the data is provided. So, it's not going to stutter at 10,000. It's not going to stutter at 100,000. So it's as fast as you need it to be. Was there something you wanted to add there, Tim?
Yeah, Austin, I think the other thing is that a lot of times the auditing process is a little bit of driving by looking in the rearview mirror. So it's like, oh, we ran into this problem with Norway, and we shouldn't be granting in Norway. And so in the future, let's make sure we don't grant in Norway. Whereas with the machine learning, it can find problems that you don't even really realize. So if you did start granting in a new country, or if you started granting a new type, or you started granting to other job levels, you don't have to tell it and anything. It'll actually highlight some of those things and say, hey, do you really want to give someone in Norway a grant, an RSU? Are you sure you want to do that? And so that's what's really good, and I think a big value here. I think the other thing is that the person who's doing the annual grant has been doing it for a while, and do you have some risk of that a lot of knowledge is right there in them, and if you can kind of spread that out and feel comfortable that the audits are getting done consistently and thoroughly, that might bring you some more ease of mind.
Exactly. Yeah. So now I'm going to step into some kind of FAQs now that we've kind of got some of the how and the why put together. So some of the things that we've heard when we've talked to clients about this in the past is, one of the first things that comes to mind is, would this data be shared with other companies? No. So everything right now is all done directly. The AI only has ability to see into the data that you grant it. So it's not getting aggregated with a bunch of other clients, and it's not like learning on all of that in order to give you some prediction. It's only visible to the data that you see, that it sees.
I think as a point to this, Austin, I think that we would not suggest taking your full list of grants and putting it into ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to take a look at them. That it's dangerous to put private information into ChatGPT. It actually exposes it to other people. And so, but whether we do machine learning or someone in your organization helps you with machine learning, it's all locked down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the next thing that is obviously of concern for people is related to PII, personal identifiable information. It's not required for this type of analysis. It can be included if you feel like it will be relevant or beneficial for the analysis. But from if your company has policies around sending personal identifiable information or kind of using that for something like this, then that's something that doesn't need to be included if you don't want it to. How long does this process take? The actual process itself is very quick. So from if this is something, there's different ways that this could be set up, whether it's on your end or potentially our end. It's one of those things that can be done just within as soon as the AI gets the data, the actual analysis portion is very quick. And so it's the more time is spent on just interpreting the results and doing the review process and making sure that everything looks good. So then kind of on a similar vein, what is the time commitment for my team is another common question that we've heard. The biggest thing is, besides just sending over the initial files for the AI analysis, the bulk of the actual time is just spent on some of that reviewing of the results. And so, that's something we typically walk through people with and say, this is when the AI says one thing, let's take a look, let's examine, let's see what actually is the cause here, and then see if the AI was correct or if it was a false positive. How reliable are the results? So with that, I'll take us into a couple of examples of times that we've done this in the past. So the first example that we're going to look at is an example client that, this was actually a real example that we were working with. So this was a client that had an upstream data source that gave them all of the HR employee data, but one of the employees had relocated recently, and there was an an error when that change got put into the HRIS system. And so instead of actually their address got changed, but their state code didn't get changed. So they basically, everything looked right. You know, the new state, or the state that hadn't changed, so it was still a valid state. But obviously the taxes for that would have gotten calculated incorrectly, and this error actually got all the way through, and the shares got sold to this employee. And then so what ended up happening is, you know, the employee ended up noticing, hey, you know, I got taxed at the incorrect amount for this. You know, and so then obviously the team had to go back and say, okay, well, what went wrong? They identified that there was an incorrect state code, and then they had to repurchase shares from the open market in order to compensate that employee for their shares. And obviously by that point, the stock price had risen, so they ended up having to spend more money at that point than they would have otherwise expected. So kind of the hypothesis that we had for them was, you know, had this process been done beforehand, you know, this could have saved you both administrative time, financial loss from the repurchasing of shares, and some of the loss of employee trust. So what we did with this client is we said, let's go ahead and both use this type of AI analysis on this example, and then also use it on a future example as well, so that we can try and catch these types of errors for you. And we were able to show them that, yes, the AI was able to identify that this specific record was a problem, but kind of after the fact. And so then we said, okay, let's do this for a new data set, for something that's in the future, and let's try and identify those errors and correct them before they cause a problem. And so that's what we did. So, you know, there was an upcoming large vest, and obviously this is a little bit different than the annual grant process, but this kind of technology can still be used kind of in a variety of different scenarios. If you're just wanting to find outliers in specific data sets, that's exactly what this is used for. So by running the machine learning beforehand for them, the AI was able to identify 30 outliers from their 22,000 record data set. And after review, 28 were true errors that would have resulted in financial impact for the client. So essentially, we were able to mitigate 28 of those of the errors, and I didn't hear of any problems that came through from that vest after the fact. So I think we managed to help it resolve all of the errors for that specific vest that they're working with. But that kind of comes out to a 93% accuracy, which to me, it kind of floored me, because that's as a data scientist, you never expect accuracy numbers that high. And so that was great to see that was actually something that was working really well. So obviously we were saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars to correct these errors before the vests were executed. So one of the other common questions that we get is, does the AI improve over time? Because right now we've seen that, you know, the AI is basically just looking at the data set that you're providing it. But how does this improve over time? And so the answer is yes, it can improve over time. The initial setup for that essentially requires more historical data. So usually what we like to do is we like to start with what's called the unsupervised approach, which is just looking at the data for a given annual grant or something like that. And then, but as you kind of repeat this process over and over and over again, you kind of can accumulate a bank of historical data that basically, you know, then says, oh, this one had an error, this one didn't have an error, this one had an error, whatever it is. And then by training a model on kind of that aggregated data from your past runs, you can then go through and allow the AI to predict on future data. So that's kind of allows it to get better and train over time and kind of use that historical basis in order to predict on stuff that might be coming in the future. And there's some benefits here that include some higher accuracy and kind of some additional information as well. But with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Tim to briefly talk about some of the ROI.
Yeah, and so, you know, should your company, you know, should your organization consider doing this? And so we wanted to give you just a simple return on investment example. And so the cost of running this outlier analysis with machine learning is actually pretty low. There's some mapping to be done, you know, to map the data right up front. But you know, the machine learning, you know, it can do this quickly and easily and kick out the results. But the potential cost of errors are pretty big, you know. And so if you end up, you know, actually giving a grant that shouldn't be given, or you're spending a lot of time moving things back and forth while you're answering these questions, that all can add up. And so you can see that, if you just invest a little bit, you could end up saving a lot in the long run. And so simple ROI. Don't have any real numbers because we don't have a real situation, but I think you can get the concept pretty easily. I'm going to move on. We do have a couple questions I'd love to get to. And so we're going to move on to our final poll, and then we'll go to the question and answer. And so here comes the poll. And so do you think your company could benefit from incorporating, this machine learning into your existing annual grant process? Definitely, we could have used it yesterday. B, yes, but we would need some time to figure it out. C, maybe still unclear where it's going to fit in. D, don't see a use. We have everything dialed in. Or E, other or not applicable. And so we're getting answers coming in, about 15% so far. Go ahead and get those answers done. Great. And just give a little bit more, some more are clicking in. Okay, just a couple more seconds. Good deal. Okay, we're going to move on as one more came in. Okay. Yes, could have used it yesterday. Yeah, it is that season. Yes, but we need some time, 15%. So the big one, maybe, but still unclear where it fits in. I understand that. And then 7% no use, and 22 not applicable. So let's, so just to remind you, so Austin and I work in a group and we do a lot of things around equity services. So if you have some other questions, other things you need help with, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get you some help around your employee equity plans. But let's get to the question and answer. Austin, did you want to take?
Sure. Yeah, I can start us off. Yeah, so we got a question around kind of some of the, for the audit process, you might be getting data from multiple different source systems, and so you might have different spreadsheets, multiple spreadsheets to do a comparison. So there's a question around, how flexible is the machine learning in order to take in data from multiple different sources, and then kind of how does that data look on the output? To answer that question, yes, the AI can take multiple data files, put in together, and it can take in some data from some place, some data from somewhere else, and then it can aggregate it and then do those kind of same correlations that we were talking about earlier. And then once the AI is able to review that data, you can either, there's a secondary question on that in terms of, where does that actual data get added to? Is it kind of a separate sheet, or is it the same sheet? And the answer is that can be appended however you'd like. We can append it either onto the existing data, or we can put it into a new data file. It's pretty flexible in that manner. So yeah. And
Great
then, Tim,
answer,
do you want to take? Oh, and then there was also another question around. I can do the learning question as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but how about answer the one, so if data is used to train the AI model, is it secured? Austin?
It is secured. Yes. So everything is secured for the model training. There is no, outside system, or we're not sending it across the internet at all to go through the AI training. That is something that we want to make sure is, obviously the PII can be in there. And so that's something that's really important to be secured. And in some instances, we've worked with HIPAA data in the past as well. So, that obviously it's super crucial to make sure that all this type of information is secured and only stored where it needs to be. So we also got a question around kind of what are some steps to start learning to program machine learning. So luckily, right now there's no better time with, how popular AI and machine learning is nowadays. There's a lot of resources online. We're also happy to get on a call if anyone is interested to kind of, go through and figure out like what it might look like for your specific situation as well, and say, maybe you have 3 different systems. Maybe you're looking at trying to implement AI in a completely different area, and it might not even be equity related. Who knows? But it's all stuff that we'd be happy to get on a call and talk a little bit more about to steps to start learning. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you. That's all the questions we had. We're right at time. And so, Emily, you want to wrap us up? Thank you all for joining us. I hope you found this very helpful, and feel free to reach out to Austin or I at any time.
All right. Thank you, Tim and Austin, for a great presentation today. I think we were able to get to all questions. But like Tim said, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Tim or Austin. And here is a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey, as your feedback is very important to us. Please also visit mossadams.com for future webcasts and other resources to help you elevate your performance upward. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.